Okay, so now you can see that all these spaces have been put on the beams on one side. The center beam doesn't have anything, so what will happen now is we'll be laminating these beams together. So you'll end up gluing these together like so, and you will end up with a laminated beam. And you can see the space in between here, which would normally have those cast iron blocks in between, which does allow for water to run through and not stay in between the joists or the beams, so that you'll get decay and rot and so on. And we'll trim these up afterwards once they're laminated together. So we'll make a whole series of those, and they'll all be glued together end to end to end. The ones at the far end over here, these ones over here have the long joists that are spanning two bends, because we have a longer straight. This is a curve on the other side, so they have to be shorter. The straight ones, the straight sections, will have a center beam that will be 32 feet, bridges two bends, and it's laminated with 16 footers on each side, and that'll give a much more rigid structure going across the bends. One of my favorite tools is an emery board, something like this. This is fairly coarse, and just to do a final step on these beams, even though we've chopped these spaces, the width of the beam itself, there's a chance that sometimes there's a little bit of a burr, not quite dead on. So it's a very simple method of just taking that emery board and lightly wiping it across the flat tops, and just trims these little spaces so they're absolutely dead flush. They're not that far off, so it doesn't take an awful lot just to true them up so that there's no raised edge there when they go together as a laminated beam. So now we've got the beams all laminated together. There are three beams with a spacer in between, and the reason we've done these ones as just 16 footers is because this one will be actually on a curve, and that allows us to go from a straight to a curve on the track. If we'd had a center beam that went straight through, that we would normally use on a straight section, obviously you can't bend it. So that's how these bends would have been built, with the beams on top of them, so that there was a curve. Now that's the contrast to the trestle that's going to be on a straight section across bends. In this case, I've used a 32-foot center beam that goes across three bends with the 16 footers on each side, which would be more typical of the lumber that they would have. This allows us to have a fairly straight beam that goes on a straight trestle. If it was a longer trestle, I would be spanning alternate lengths like so that you'd have a bend here, a bend here, a bend here, and a bend here, and the overlaps are what brace this up. But in my case, right now, we have a short trestle, so we're going to have two 32-foot lengths that'll be connected across the end here. Now the other thing that'll happen, and the reason that these spaces are here, is when these are laminated, and these are usually iron spaces in here, we'll be drilling a hole through here, because what they did is they put a lag bolt straight through all three timbers and through that iron spacer, and that's how this was all held together and laminated. So the next step we'll be doing is drilling holes and putting NBWs, or nut, bolt, and washer castings, in these locations for some added detail. So the next thing we're going to do is install these NBWs. That stands for nut, bolt, and washer. So first of all, I've painted these just black, and I'll throw a bit of rust over them. And then these will be cut off on the sprues across here. And then what we'll do is we'll drill in the side of the each of the beams, because they would have bolted two bolts through to sandwich these beams together. And so we'll drill those, and we'll install the NBWs along the side for a little added detail. So you could use a drill press, but this is not that complicated that we can't just drill these in place in line, just one over the other. And so on. So then we'll put the NBWs in there. Okay, so now we're ready to install the NBWs, and of course, as I said, I've pre-drilled these beams in the side, and I've cut off the NBWs off the sprues, taken the pad of the post-it note pad, put a little bit of white glue on that, and then carefully picking these up with a pair of tweezers, dip the end of the sprue into the white glue, and carefully just press it into the pre-drilled hole. And so on. So take one at a time, gently picking it up, just a dash of glue, press it in, and so on. Two at each end. You have to be very careful you don't hold these too tightly because they will snap out of the tweezers, and invariably you won't find them. And if you're short on NBWs, you're not going to be able to finish the installation of the NBWs. So, just in case you don't believe that there's an NBW there is an NBW on my hand. You can see they're quite tiny, and these ones actually aren't the smallest ones. So the next important thing to do is you want to be sure that the ends are all square, because when they butt into each other you want to make sure all the joints are touching and are connected. So what I've done is I've set up put my square on my sanding disc, and I will press that against there so the end is quite square, and press it into the disc. Like so. So now I know that those ends are square, so when I butt each set of beams together, they're going to be touching 100% and make a nice solid connection when glued together. So now to join these together, I'll do one set. That's pretty standard for them all until we get to the curved ones. I take a nice long straight edge because I want to make sure the beams are in line, and I put a weight on it to hold it in place. And now I've put some white glue on the ends of the beams on each end that are going to be mated together, and I put one against the straight edge, and it's handy to have some extra weights. I have a number of steel weights to hold it in place, and then take the other one and just press it in, and the straight edge keeps them absolutely tight in line. And then what I'll do is put one more weight across the joint, so that let's just change these around a little bit so that the top of the beam is flush, and make sure that's nice and tight against the straight edge. Push them together nice and tight, and that'll just sit for a few minutes until it cures, and it'll have a nice strong joint, and then we'll end up with a nice long set of beams ready to go on to the next step. Okay, so now we are presented with having to do these beams on a curve, and on a curve they're going to end up being like so. You have to get the right angle. So what I've done is I've beveled the end of these slightly so that they will form a slight curve, like so. And what we'll do is we'll test fit this against the existing road bed that's on the layout, and we'll go and take a look at that right now.